On social media, we often see the highlight reel for authors, the publication announcement, the cover reveal, the book's publication. But behind the scenes, it's not always so dreamy. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. Many authors experience moments of rejection and setbacks, and today we're going to talk about it. Hey, everybody.
Hey,
Kristen.
Hey, Kristen.
So we're wrapping up for a few weeks, and we wanted to talk about a reality for many writers and authors, the dreaded rejection. We're all kind of seasoned pros, but I know we all have multiple stories about rejections, both, minor and perhaps even major. Why don't we share some?
Thinking about rejection, it's sometimes worth, how it helps me is to reframe it a little bit, that if you're not getting rejected, you're maybe not pushing yourself enough. On a very minor note, I wrote something that was not necessarily an article. It was just more of this experimental thing I wrote, and I submitted it to McSweeney's. And I followed their submission guidelines. And a week later, I got a little rejection. So I was like, wasn't as brilliant as I maybe thought it was. But I put myself out there, and now I can stick it up on my rejection wall and keep trying.
No pain, no gain.
Right.
But there is a rejection wall, huh?
No, there isn't. But maybe I should have one. I've heard some very successful authors collect their 100 rejection letters. And then once they finally get the one, I think it was Elizabeth Gilbert used to do that. Lots of people.
Andrea, how about you?
My career in food writing started out as rejection in this cookbook writing anyway, because I was told that, I wasn't marketable. So in that sense, I thought, I believed in my idea and I was just going to see what happens and what the universe would bring about. But I remember when a very powerful agent told me that she couldn't sell my project, I was like, at least I got to talk to this powerful agent on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
So she saw the value of it, but she said, I can't sell you. You're not on the Food Network. And then, that was in the 90s. That was a different time. But I have learned over the years that if you really want to do something, you got to just keep your eyes and ears open. But you also want to have a backup plan.
Yeah. How about you, Molly?
Well, it's funny. I've been thinking about this. And I think one thing I realized is that I remember the yeses more than the nos. I mean, that's funny because we say we remember the harder things or the more traumatic things better than but in terms of my career, I tend to separate personal and if we're talking personal rejection, that's a whole nother conversation.
No.
But we're not talking about that. We're talking professional. I think that has really helped me is that I've been able to when my work is rejected or my proposals. And all the magazine work I've done, countless. I can't even begin to think of the articles. I think I still have a file right here for some article I was trying to do about fresh peas. And it just, it's half developed because it never got taken. But yeah, my history is littered with rejection for small things. I think one of the bigger ones that happened is it was a co-author project. A chef had done a book with the co-author, very successful. The publisher wanted a second one. And for some reason, the author and the chef weren't in agreement on how it should go forward. And so I was brought on as a possible co-author. And I met with the chef and we worked on the proposal. And I was terribly excited about this project. And we didn't get that far through the proposal process. And the original co-author came back and said, I want to do this. And I was kind of heartbroken because I was very excited about it. And I had met with the chef and I thought we were hitting it off, but onward.
Yeah.
But it's funny. The more I started thinking about it, I was like, oh yeah, that sucked. I remember when that happened. And I just, had some work happen recently and I didn't go anywhere. And it happens all the time.
All the time.
It is almost like part of the game. I remember when I first left Food and Wine magazine, I would interview for these, co-author jobs and often not get them. Or maybe they would say, we'll hire you as a recipe tester, but, not the full co-author. And there is this chicken and egg situation sometimes with co-authoring, you need to co-author a book before you can co-author a book.
Right.
So there was a lot of rejection in the beginning. But what's funny is I kind of realized it still actually happens. Like that, like you said, Molly, you think about the yeses more than the nos. So I don't always think of them now as rejection, but there are times when I meet with somebody about working on a book together and I'm excited, and then they decide to go with another writer for whatever reason. I mean, it could be the money. It could be they just had a better rapport. I guess now I think of it less as rejection and more just okay, it didn't work out. And
you're a contractor putting out bids or something for a house remodel, and maybe somebody else put in a better bid. It's sort of strange that way. But yeah, I think, Molly, your idea of separating professional and personal is really healthy, because then it's not a personal rejection. It's just a matter of doing business.
Yeah, that's true.
And sometimes when I've been rejected for, in a co-authoring situation, maybe we've gone as far as the proposal and it isn't picked up. And oftentimes, I have never once regretted not doing one of those books. As soon as it's done, it's out of my brain. I'm almost sometimes relieved, because I'm always nervous starting a new co-authoring project, because I always know there's minefields that I can't foresee. And so, any project doesn't have to be just co-authoring, but I don't know, when they've been rejected or haven't been picked up by a publisher, I've never once thought, oh, that's the one that got away. It hasn't happened yet.
Mm-hmm. You probably knew, you had a feeling.
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah. This past season, we've had some authors reveal their past rejections that it actually sparked this should be something we talk about more. One that comes to mind is Alicia Kennedy, who has a book out now, No Meat Required. And she said recently that she was trying to pitch a cookbook and it was being turned down. And, this is not to say that she will never do a cookbook. Who knows what the universe holds? But just to hear an author she has a lot of acclaim, people love her, and even she's experiencing that.
Yeah. And just I think it was last week's episode, Martha Holmberg we were talking about single subject cookbooks, and she has, 5 of them. But she talked about how she's pitched a lot more than that. Ideas here's my idea, and had pitched it to her publisher, who she has a really good relationship with, and they're not so excited about it.
Yeah.
And yet she's got a new one out. So I think that whole notion, especially for people who we think of as, so successful, that there is no overnight success. I mean, Andrea is a great story. It's Andrea, you're crushing it right now, but it certainly didn't just happen overnight.
No.
There's a lot of rejection along the way. But I also think there's a thing about I hear a lot of people talk about having one idea and it keeps getting rejected and keeps getting rejected. And sometimes I think what we're talking about now is having multiple different ideas, and you refocus and move on and but as opposed to just beating that same drum. But we'll talk more about how you deal with rejection as we get into this, I'm sure.
Yeah. On Instagram, recently, a writer who I respect, Kristen Hartke, she posted a rejection letter from 1999 from the Washington Post, and it was on letterhead, That was those days when you still had the snail mail.
Very formalized, communication. Yeah.
Exactly. And it was a rejection letter, and she just kept going at it, and they changed editors, and eventually, she ended up to this day has written 60 plus articles for the Post.
That's awesome.
So persistence is good.
Persistence can pay. Yeah.
Yes.
And Molly, you mentioned this co-authoring project that didn't work out, and Matt Radbard also mentioned that. And I thought his story was particularly interesting because it made him realize that when he works with somebody, he wants for it to be a true partnership where his voice is also part of it. He doesn't want to necessarily inhabit an author's voice. And with that project where they let him go from it, that's what he was supposed to do. And I think wasn't having a lot of success at it. And it actually just helped him hone who he is a little bit more as a writer, as an author, and what he brings to a project. So sometimes, those rejections can just bring so much clarity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, sometimes whoever it is that's hiring or accepting, they know better than you do. You're not the right one for this job,
Yeah, even if that's hard to hear.
Yeah.
So in bookmaking, this career of being a cookbook author, there are many different kinds of rejections. Some that are little and feel like paper cuts maybe, and others that feels like somebody stomped on your soul. So let's talk about just some of those rejections that happen along the way. In the bookmaking process, it's interesting because somebody said copy editing that can feel like rejection sometimes.
Yeah, because they mark everything up, and it's like red and it's in track changes in Word.
It's like you're in trouble.
Right. And your beautiful prose now looks like a Jackson Pollock painting that can be beautiful someday.
Yeah. And it is that initial visceral reaction to something that comes back all marked up. But then also you think it's beautiful and they come back and say, yeah, you should say it a different way. And you're like, I worked on that sentence so hard. I really think it's a beautiful, or a recipe title, or so many little gems you think you've put in your book. And they're like, I don't know, flatten it. Let's make it this. Let's do that.
Yeah. And it's really so challenging because sometimes they're wrong, but sometimes you're right. And it's and in that phase of the bookmaking process, it's confusing because visually, you're looking at your screen and there are multiple colors on there.
Yeah.
And it's as if they have eviscerated your work. Yeah. And it's your job to put it together again and make it whole for yourself. In that process, I always feel like there is this rejection that happens about what you feel has been so valuable. And sometimes it can happen even earlier than the copy editing process. Sometimes it's in the developmental phase, right? Where your lead editor is like, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, let's cut this chapter, my egg chapter. Gone.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
How long did you spend on that egg chapter?
Yeah,
on these recipes,
or I think about covers too, the whole cover conversation.
Covers.
You fall in love with a cover and then it's gone.
Sales and marketing want something else.
Yeah, or title. Yeah.
It's like a rejection of your ideas. And I think it always comes in a group setting because whether you're writing solo or you're writing in a co-author situation, you're part of a team. You've got the editor, copy editor, sales and marketing is going to have something to say. It's a big team behind the scenes. And just think of it as probably what goes on in Hollywood in a writer's room where somebody says, oh, the character's got to go into the cave. And they're like, that's a dumb idea. You don't want a character going in the cave. And I think it's like that with cookbooks. It's like, well, I needed this sidebar because it's so important. And they're just like, this is boring, or there's no space for it, or, well, yeah, this has got to go.
No
and
one
it's
will
almost
make
like
that.
Your ideas are being rejected because they are. But maybe it'll make the work stronger if you've got the right team around you.
Yeah. I never thought about it as rejection for some reason. That's not the feeling when I get edited that I have had, but now I can see how it can feel that way. But maybe
it depends on how wrong they were. No, it's constructive criticism is what I say.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I found it with co-authoring. I have had situations where I have written, as we like to call it, the shitty first draft, or maybe it's the introduction. And it's really me trying to figure out the voice of the person that I'm supposed to be taking on. And I know it's not there, but you got to show the person so you can start finessing it. Mm-hmm. And I've had co-authors and they read it. They're like, this is really bad. Maybe we should bring on a linguist to help us with the English language. I've had feedback I never thought of as a rejection, but I guess in a way it really was.
That's a cut.
Yeah, I would think for me, what I look at it now is when you're working with a team in any capacity, it's this trust tree. You need to have the trust. And then in my situation, once I've got the trust from my co-author, then I run with it. And then they're just like, oh, this is exactly what I was talking about. But those initial times, and it's not every single project, but it's happened. And it's like, oh, yeah. Or this is so boring. You've got to make my life sound more interesting.
We were talking to someone about a book going to auction. This idea that you've got a book proposal out there and you don't necessarily take just the best offer because you want the best match. Because the idea is that sometimes if your book is accepted by someone who has a different idea for your book. So I think I'm only bringing this up because there's a lot of rejection in, you want someone who gets what you're trying to do.
Totally.
Not trying to take your proposal, square peg, round hole, trying to take your proposal and put it into some other idea. So that's a tricky.
Yeah. Unless you like their ideas. It can happen where a publisher has a slightly different vision or maybe even a fairly different vision, but you're like, you know what? I like that. Let's do it. But it's true. If it gives you that yucky feeling, this is not what I wanted to do.
And so there's funny dance about being, it goes back to what I was saying before about, if you have this one idea and you keep, beating that same drum and it's not getting anywhere. If you really are passionate about something and you really do believe in it, but also, realistically to know to get a team that will help you shape it into what it hopefully will become. It's interesting because it is a team effort. Writing a book,
yes,
certainly in standard publishing, it's a big team effort. So there's a lot of people who, are invested in making it work. So learning to listen to those other people, yet knowing what's true to what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
I think the worst kind of rejection, to tell you the truth, is the silent rejection. That's a rejection where you send something in and you never hear back.
Yeah. It's like how to handle rejection, but then also how to reject, because sometimes you might be in the position to do both. I mean, as an editor, I've had to reject things before. I guess even for this podcast, sometimes we'll hear from people and the pitch isn't quite right. And I think sometimes the silent rejection comes about because people are deciding, but I also think it can come about because they don't want to do it, but they don't know what to say, or they don't want to hurt your feelings.
Yeah, but I would rather
just hear the straightforward no, right?
Exactly. Or, that's not going to work out, or blah, blah, blah. I mean, because the silent rejection leaves the person on the other end, the person who submitted. Yeah, like going, what's going on? And if you can find like a way to say no, you see the person.
Well, I think especially if somebody sent a pitch where they saw you, because sometimes there are those pitches that are just like, you can tell it's like a blanketed pitch out to like, hundreds of people. And so that's maybe where you send a no thanks quick. But if somebody pitches you this very like individualized pitch.
Oh, I'm talking about like pitches that I've sent to my friends. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
And then they're like silent and I go.
Yeah. So I bet sometimes, Andrea, they're probably deciding like, this is good. Where does this fit in? And then it falls it falls through the cracks. Yeah. And then that's so annoying. And then you got to follow up.
You got to follow up.
What you just said about deciding and then they forget. I've often heard from editors and people in positions to hire people, whether it's project-based or it's who's in front of them at that moment, whose name is on the tip of their tongue kind of thing. And so it was JJ Good was talking about this, that like he'll hire out recipe testers and he's just like, oh yeah, that person. So that persistence again, like to keep that balance of persistence and nagging and hounding. And that's one that I think I fall short on because I get shy about like, reminding people that I'm around or that I never heard back. So
yeah, I'm bad at that too, and I don't want to be the person that's constantly like promoting 24/7, but you kind of have to do that nowadays, right?
Well, and as a freelancer, you can get fired by just silence.
Right. Absolutely right.
Just happened to me. Totally ghosted. Done. Got paid. Never heard another thing. I was like, okay, well, that was fun. But
weird.
It's just
so
weird.
Maybe a staffing issue?
Yeah, whatever.
That's so crazy. Well, I think another thing too is that you can't control what other people think about you. You can only control what you think about yourself. Right. So I feel like that has to be kind of built in also, because if you take rejection and it feels like they're rejecting you and like they don't like you, it's really can really sting. But if, take a day, be upset, but then, move on and go to the next thing, because that's how you keep going. Otherwise, we'd never get anywhere.
Right.
Absolutely.
I don't know how much we deal with this on our own social media, but I mean, people can be very nasty on social media or reviews. Like if you think about like Amazon reviews and
do any of you read your reviews?
I'm just laughing because it's the reviews are like, there weren't enough pictures in this book. And
this is funny. I don't read reviews for things until way after, like maybe 6 months to a year later after publication, because I like don't want it. Mm-hmm. But I was revisiting reviews from Modern Potluck a few months ago, and there are some hilarious negative reviews that contradict each other. It's like, this is too modern. This is like really boring, But then there was one about like, who eats this many vegetables at a gathering?
Solid goal.
And just for fun, I decided to like take it and put it on Instagram with like the 1 star. And like, it was like one of my most popular posts in months because it's hilarious. It's like one of those negative reviews that attracts at the same time. So it's like, well, I eat that many vegetables at a gathering. So sometimes I think you can have fun with that stuff. Like I see that a lot. People will take the nasty comments they get on social media and like turn that into like a funny piece of content. If you can laugh at it, you should.
Have you ever been tagged in a review of one of your books and it's a negative review?
No.
There's someone on Instagram that, and I haven't really followed this thread because it's not that interesting to me, but they seem to create other people's recipes and then talk about what they would do differently. So they tag your recipe and then say, but I did this, this, and this instead, and it's much better.
Oh, snap.
And it's
So is that a joke? Is that performance art?
No, I think it's an interesting way
That's
to,
funny.
they're building followers. They have, like I said, I haven't followed it that hard.
But did they
because
try it your way first?
I don't think they do. Because I kind of clicked through a few things and was trying to see what's going on here. And it seems to be that's the thing to do. So that's the platform they're building, is that I take other people's recipes and do something else with them and then post about them, which, have fun. That's great. But that's not something I'm not going to jump, through hoops to, repost or connect to, or because it's just not that interesting. But there are, you do see, I definitely have people who, especially some of my older recipes, they've made them their own. I follow this recipe and now this is the way I do it. I love that. They're learning to cook. That's fantastic.
That's a dream,
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I mean, like I read my Amazon reviews.
Do you read them like right away?
No, I mean, I check in, especially when a book comes out, because inevitably there are going to be someone who's disgruntled. You remember the few negatives
Yeah.
and not enough of the positives. And I think that that's something that is a very natural reaction.
Yeah.
But sometimes, like, the negative stuff, I always try to think, like, what are they like reacting to? And I try to learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people will say, like with my latest book, it's plant-based, but it's not vegan.
Mm-hmm.
And we never say that vegan can be plant-based, but it's not necessarily plant-based. And then we mentioned meat in the book description, like low meat, but they didn't read all the way through and they just assumed that was for them. But it's the kind of thing where you go, well, you were just jumping on the gun trying to find something to point out. And that's like their strange purpose in life. It's proselytizing.
Yeah.
And I just happened to be the target at that moment.
Well, and that's a hot topic right now. We talked to Lucas Vogler about that, and that just the term plant-based right now is definitely
in flux.
Yeah. Another interesting thing about rejection is like, so you've poured everything into, you got a book. So, you made your book, but it doesn't sell.
Mm-hmm.
Are you done? Do you do another book? So that's something that I think is a very real thing because yes, you can influence hopefully your book sales by doing the best job you can. But sometimes, just hits at the wrong time. It's the wrong topic. It's the book jacket falls off when people pick it up. I mean, there's all sorts of weird things that happen. And recovering from that, I think, that's a tough one.
I think that's even harder than getting a proposal rejected, because you've gone through all the hard work and investment in years getting a book out there. And the scary thing is, when a book doesn't sell, does that mean you're not as attractive to publishers for the next book? That's a really tough thing. So you have to still really feel very satisfied with the work you did with that book. And I also think it also should be a subject you want to live with for a long time, so you can keep hopefully building that interest in it over the long span of time.
Yeah, it's got to be a long-term haul. I mean, so many people are invested in your project for it to be green-lighted to begin with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so for you to be able to bring it to market, that's a huge success. That's a win right there.
Right.
And timing, the marketplace, economic changes, many things are out of your control. If you wanted to continue writing, that's something that you need to have a discussion with your agent or an editor about for your next project. To just say, well, this is what we did. This is how the market reacted to it. I'm still here. I got a good track record, whatever.
Yeah.
It's like you're saying, I'm not done yet.
Yeah. Just because a book is older, whatever, which I feel like means like 6 months old at this point. Like, it's just like,
It's crazy.
It just feels like the cycle is so fast. But even if it's 10 years old or more, if it's in print, it's still out there and you still can sell it.
And I think it's a question to ask yourself if you're considering a cookbook, back to episode number 1.
Right.
If it doesn't sell well, or if it's not a bestseller, if it doesn't get awards, that's another thing we talk about,
Yeah.
will I still be happy to have made this book? And I think if you need to be able to answer that question for yourself, for me, in the affirmative, that yes, I want to make the book because I think it's something worth making. yeah, it's a bummer if it doesn't sell or if it doesn't get acknowledged. But if you're proud of the book, that's a huge accomplishment.
You know, one of the things I notice is that oftentimes when awards season comes around, and you know, we talked about awards with Charlotte Druckmann, and we have issues with them because there are so many worthy books that come out every year that are so beautifully made. And yet there are only so many award slots. You know, we get into the final running, and like the people who get into that finalist list, I look at them and I'm like, you're all winners already. And you don't know how the final recipients, what decides that. But getting a book is winning, getting into awards is winning. But also, like, what I love seeing sometimes is when an awards committee notices a book that's just been like really low key, a sleeper. You know, that I go, God, that was like a really good book. And how come like it was just overlooked? I mean, there's still every year, I always think about books that I really value. And I'm like, no one cared or few people cared about it but me, you know? So that is a form of rejection. But I think that for people who have experienced something like that, just realize that to get to where you have already, even like to give an agent's attention, that is winning. And you just like each step is something, is a progression towards realizing your end goal.
And maybe that's a reminder about the whole moving the goalposts thing. What happens, you get your agent, and that was your goal. And now your goal is to have a book. And now your goal, you have a book, but you want it to be a bestseller. And now you have a bestseller, but you want it to win awards. There's always going to be like the moving of the goalposts. So it's like reframing, you know, the value of that book and not pinning it to outside things that you can't control. That's really good point, Andrea, that it's I think awards are so arbitrary too. And sometimes it just depends what's like blown on the air. And it also means it doesn't always equate to a longevity for the book either. So that's something
or
else.
Sales.
Or sales.
Or sales. It used to, but not anymore.
Right.
Well, I don't even know how much it used to.
Yeah, not necessarily.
So I received a question from a listener. I feel like it's worth talking about because I have a feeling that there are a lot of listeners who are grappling with something similar. And so she is an aspiring author. She's written a lot for publication, and she put together a book proposal. It's a single subject book. And everyone she's pitched so far says she needs a social media presence. As far as I know, she actually has no Instagram account, or if she does, it's very small. I hear this a lot. To me, I'm like, if that's the criticism and the thing that's getting in the way, I honestly would just work on my social media following. Like, I don't know what else to say. But what do you guys think?
I think it's changed a lot, especially with the advent of TikTok and how people with successful TikTok or Reels can really move books, and publishers are seeing that internally. It is getting harder to not have a strong social media. If you have a strong Substack or some sort of newsletter, though, that can work in its place. But I do think now I would have never been able to publish my own book today if I were pitching the same subject, at least with the same publisher, because I just feel like they're in their acquisitions meetings, and it's not just the editors who have this beautiful idea. They also have sales and marketing, and they're in there and they're saying, have you heard of this person? Let me call up my friend in New York and see if they're, you know, interesting enough. The friend in New York, nope, never heard of him. Well, if they haven't heard of him in this subject and they're experts, well, maybe we'll pass, even though this proposal is absolutely perfect. That's what's happening. That's the reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a business decision. On the other hand, when you look at the success of folks on TikTok and Instagram via Reels, it happens very quickly. It used to be like you had to like really build up that following over the many years, but the growth is fast these days. It's unclear as to how that translates into sales consistently, I think. And so with that in mind, I would definitely build a social media presence, but one that's solid.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You know, you want people who are like there with you, who are going to be your fans, who understand and who make the purchase. And something like Substack may be good. You can do, you know, like build things up, like I think like Carolyn Chambers has on Substack, where, you know, you have that audience and you can test content out on them. And that's an audience that's going to read. They're not an audience that watches a lot of short video clips.
Yeah. Substack for it's like if writing is just like your strength and your passion, And like the visual thing is just less so. Substack is a great platform. That said, I still would, if you have no Instagram account, no TikTok perhaps, I would create one. Maybe even try and like if you're writing on Substack, sometimes people share screenshots from their Substack and it does well because people read on Instagram. But it just feels like a reality that like I don't know how else to overcome.
But it's a tricky one too, because I think you have to maintain some authenticity about what you're trying to say. And if you're not at all on social media, if you have an aversion to it that just somehow either, like you're saying, Kristen, you just got to get over it and get on there. The Substack makes sense. You could just sort of hone your craft that way. The other thing is if it's, if this is a book that just needs to be made, and if you can find a way to hybrid or self-publish it.
Also true, but you still need an audience. That's the thing.
That's the thing. You need to define the audience. And if you don't have an audience through either social media or a newsletter or your writing, but this person has written a lot for publication, so there's an audience out there reading it. Mm-hmm. They've already have an engagement with some sort of audience. So just sort of figure out what it is about who's reading what you're doing and try to like pull at those threads.
Right. Yeah. If it's an academic angle, maybe an academic press would be the way to go also. Maybe that it would be a little bit of a different editorial process, but there are, University of Chicago, University of California at Berkeley. There's a lot of different presses and they're very small advances, but they have a different kind of rigor behind the approvals process. However, I would be kind of curious, maybe if somebody out there works for one, you can tell us how important TikTok and Instagram are to publishing certain people. I know one of my favorite books on publishing and being a writer and making a living being a writer is by Jane Friedman, and she published with University of Chicago. She has a great platform, but that wasn't the reason that she probably went with University of Chicago. And I'm hoping she's going to refresh her edition. I think she's working on some things that will make it maybe talk about these particular angles about what presence do you need online.
Yeah, I will think about who your target audience is and really dial it down. Mm-hmm. Let's say you got like a topic about gardening. How are you going to cook by using succulents, let's say? Okay. So,
we're going really narrow here.
Yeah. Really narrow.
Cooking with succulents, the movie.
Yeah. Cacti, don't get prickly with me. I mean, something like that. I would find that group. Maybe it's a Reddit group. Yeah. Maybe, it doesn't necessarily have to be Instagram, but, you got to find your people and test it out on them. And then, try to pull in their interests and pull them along. The thing is that we talked about this a lot. There's the money involved. I mean, if you're looking for this to be a revenue source for you, it could be hard.
Yeah. And the other thing about Instagram, just rethinking this, or social media in general, whatever your aversion is, if it's about, I don't like social media, it's too personal, it's too invasive, then just don't do it a personal account. Make it about the topic. Make it about your work. Call it something, the succulent.
The succulent savant.
Yeah. This goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of the episode about, rejection and professional. Put it under a professional heading in your life, because if you're writing a book, it's for publication, it's for an audience. You need to find your audience.
Another thing I actually said was like, maybe your audience is not in the United States.
Yeah.
Could you look into publishing in the UK or in Australia or, somewhere where you might have a bigger audience and then bring the book to the US later? Anyway, I wanted to chew that over because she's not the only one who's ever asked this. And I know it's a struggle for a lot of people.
Yep.
So we've kind of woven some tips for dealing with rejection throughout this, but let's drill into them.
It's not a rejection of me personally.
Yeah.
We all have our own strengths, but I also try to figure out maybe I didn't do a good enough job on it. I mean, I really do want to ask those questions too. Is there a reason that nobody wanted the spring article on fresh peas? Well, because it's been done a million times, and why is mine unique or something like that? But just to really look at why was it rejected? And, you might not be able to answer that, but to see if I can't learn something from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes, people reject things, and I always try to figure out reading the tea leaves and what can I learn from that rejection? Mm-hmm. Was it fair? Was it rational? Was that person of sound mind when they sent it? And how can I turn, that no into something I can learn from, and I can turn into a yes somewhere else? Maybe your spring peas, Molly, can become mushy peas are good. Bring back canned peas. Oh, yeah.
some clickbait, some kind of clickbait title, right?
Yeah. 10 ways to work with canned peas. Turn that into something that is going to remove my personal emotional attachments or detach myself from it so that I can go on with myself the next day.
Yeah, like the ego. It's funny. When I worked at Food and Wine, I was rewritten many times. In the beginning, it was really hard. And then I just detached. It was funny. It was like a coping strategy, I guess. But I just started to like remove my ego from it and sort of like, take the edits, but then also like look at like really analyze that voice that they were after and like the people whose writing they like. I would actually like notate and be like, okay, they started with the little story here and they pulled in little colorful details about somebody's outfit here. And like I try to mimic, I guess I was like mimicking what they wanted.
My early articles, I would take the published one and I would take my submittal and I would read them side by side.
Wow.
Smart.
And go through them with a pen and read them side by side. And even if I had seen, like some, depending on who you're writing for in publication, even if I'd seen the edits along the way, you still never know what they're going to do. Especially, this is magazine work, not book work as much. But in terms of a learning strategy, I would just go down and study. I love that idea about reading other people's that have made it into that publication.
Certain writers, even on staff, who they just always loved, you know? And I was like, what do they do?
Yeah, I recently opened up it's a very old document for my first book. And it's one of, the Word document. I was praying it didn't like crash since it's so old. And just opening up to look up a recipe and just see how I formatted it. I went, oh my God, there is so much red and green and the track changes colors are bananas. And there's so many track changes that I'm like, I can't even believe this book exists because I've lost the plot. Wow. So yeah, that was a learning curve. But I do think looking for those learning moments. However, if I turned in a recipe that I know is very sound and that it works, and if I got a lot of this wouldn't work, you do it this way, like I wouldn't do it that way because of this. And if I've tested it a million times backwards and forwards and I know it really works and I'm getting negative feedback on it, at that point, I know that the person delivering the feedback is maybe not somebody I need to study deeply to figure out what's going to work for them, unless I'm sort of in a job and I'm just delivering the goods. But you can also, once you've gotten to a certain level, think of who's giving you the rejection. Like Andrea,
totally.
Like you said, is it fair? At this point, you kind of know, you've worked with enough people, it's like fair versus like somebody just wants to put their stamp or they didn't really know what they wanted. And you give them what they said they wanted and it's not what they wanted. So that's a whole different, like that's not rejection. That's more just this kind of this dialogue, this conversation.
Or power
well,
thing.
One of the things about, and it is like negotiating power, is that when something happens to your work in the editing phase, for example, and if you're feeling confident, you engage that person in conversation, professional dialogue, because sometimes they just say stuff and you're like, wait a second, you hired me to do X, Y, and Z, and now you want me to do A, B, and C. Mm-hmm. I submitted according to X, Y, and Z. What's the problem now? How can we work on this to move forward?
Yeah.
Right.
People can be so breezy because they don't have that much time these days, your editors and stuff, and so for your own sanity and self-respect, you want to say, I'm going to engage with you. I'm not going to just like go quietly away.
Right. And one of the things on that case is that, we don't know what kind of day they had when they read that. Maybe they weren't really thinking clearly. Maybe it was the end of a very long day. Maybe they have a small child that's been bugging them at this whole time that they've been trying to read and focus on your article or your proposal. There's so many things that could have happened to them. So you really have to think, okay, is this like, do what Kristen and Molly said, study it, see if you can do better. Maybe just this wasn't the right person or the right day to submit. Sometimes it could be like a year later, if you sent the same proposal to the same person, they might love it. That's how arbitrary all this rejection can be sometimes.
Yeah. It's so true. Do any of you ever have this feeling of like rejection revenge where you really want to like prove, get back at somebody, or like I'm somebody who I like wish I had that more?
Yes, definitely. 100%. Anytime I've been sort of rejected, it's been like, I'll show them what they were missing out on. Maybe not specifically on that idea, but maybe whatever I do next. Oh yeah, it's in the back of my head. I'm it's quietly back there. I'm not going to like wear revenge success.
With the sign. I'll show you.
And sometimes it could just be like something silly. Like I'm trying to think of like a really concrete example. Sometimes in publishing, people are moving pretty quick. Oh, this might be juicy. I hope, maybe people who've stayed to the end of this episode will like see this little juicy tip that I'm about to drop. But, publishing houses are busy. We were getting ready to launch one of the books I had worked on. And I noticed there had been no communication with press releases or anything like that. And then my co-author accidentally was sent a press release for a book that was coming out in the same season. And it looked really thought out. And there was lots of like media that they were going to submit to and all this. And I thought, wow, it's not like they've rejected our book because they're publishing it, but they certainly don't seem to care all that much. And so that was when you start the email. It's like, can we start a dialogue on like creating our press release and this and that? And then it's like, oh, we've got a month or so to work on that. I'm like, no, let's get it going now. We wrote our own, we wanted to get it out. We wanted to be more on top of it because we had no trust at that point. And so that wasn't a rejection, but it was more like a slight.
I love this trust thing, Kate.
Yeah, you're really on it. There's our trust tree.
Yes, yes.
And then I feel like this is just something that's out in the ether all the time. People talk about their big why. Know your why. And I do think it is something that can help you overcome. For me, I just love doing this work. Right. So that's kind of my why. Like, I keep going because I like doing this work. I'm good at it. But for you, it might be your topic or about the people that you're reaching. So I don't know if you have any words to add to that.
No, I think that sums it up, Kristen. No,
your faces.
Why are you doing this? What's the reason? And if a little bit of rejection, it's funny when we talked about doing this episode, we were like, we don't want it to be a bummer, but it's such a reality. And if getting rejected or slighted or paper cuts or whatever, told no is going to stop you from doing it, well, that's the problem. You need to be able to overcome all the no's to get to the final yes.
Mm-hmm. Know your why and keep on going, because this is a very strange industry that we talk about, and you have to stay positive. And rejection happens in all parts of our lives, but I think that we can focus on how we can turn that negativity around so that we can meet our end goals. So this wasn't a bummer. I think that, and also talk about your rejection with your friends too, because we all have them. It's like cathartic.
I think all of us share this in common, to not become embittered by them, become experienced by it, learn from it. But the takeaway isn't a woe is me situation.
Yeah. I think it's very satisfying to have that like petty moment right afterwards.
Oh, give yourself the moment. Oh, yes. Give yourself the moment.
Pat yourself for the petty moments in life.
Yes. Indulge in some woe is me for a little bit.
Text your friends and
exactly.
But it's true. In the long term, it's like bless and release or.
No, I think it's a good thing to talk about and a good way to wrap up season 3.
Yeah. And we'll be back with more episodes quite soon in October. We're taking a few weeks off.
Yeah. Lots of good stuff coming.
It was fun to have all 4 of us on again. Thanks for being our fearless leader on this tricky subject, Kristen.
Yeah. Thank you, Kristen.
My pleasure. Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more episodes and ways to contact us, go to our website, everythingcookbooks.com. The show is also available on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your audio. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a review. Any book mentioned in the show can be found on our affiliate page at bookshop.org. Thanks as always to our editor, Abby Circatella. Until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.